Hey, what's up, guys? Luke Profit. So how do eBay suspensions work? Now, there are suspensions, there are restrictions, and it's kind of confusing, and they seem kind of like the same thing, but to eBay reps, they're two different things. So you can have an account that's suspended, but it's not restricted, or you can have an account that's restricted, but it's not suspended. So kind of confusing stuff, but the main thing, and it's pretty hard to to figure out what the difference is, but essentially, when you do things that violate eBay's policies, usually they'll send you messages first, and they'll kind of give you little slaps on the wrist and be like, no, no, don't do that. For example, there's a policy that basically says you can't compare to other brands, so you can't say like, these are glasses like Ray-Ban glasses, but they're not Ray-Ban brand glasses. They're similar to, like, you can't say similar to, like, or compare. And so I didn't know that at first, and I got a couple warnings from eBay on that. I don't think I ever got a suspension, but I would have if I had kept violating the policy. So they give you warnings first. You can also get them for listing Vero brands or restricted items. Listing if you go to list gun-related items or medical prescription items and stuff like that. That is against eBay's policies for restricted items, so they would give you some warnings. And the way that restricted items works is they've got different categories of restricted items. And essentially, you don't really have to worry about restrictions or you don't have to worry about suspensions and stuff unless you're getting repeated violations in the same category. So if that makes sense. So eBay has a bunch of different categories of items. So say and you get essentially you're only going to get suspended if you get repeated violations in the same category. So let's say these are their restricted items, right? They've got firearms items. They've got medical and prescription items. There's those are the two main ones that cause the most problems, but there are other ones as well. I'm just trying to think of what they are because I haven't gotten them recently. Okay, yeah, so let's just say those two categories, and I know there's a third one. There are a lot of them, but those are the two main ones that get me a lot, is the gun-related items and medical and prescription items. So essentially, if you get a warning, hey, we took this listing down, don't list gun-related items, don't list, scopes for guns or whatever, that's fine, and you're probably not going to get a suspension. And then if you get one, hey, you listed this, whatever, don't list that, it violates our medical and prescription items policy. It's not something that you really need to worry about if you're getting warnings for a bunch of different categories. What you wouldn't want to be worried about, though, is if you get, like, say you get hit, warning for medical and prescription, another warning for medical and prescription, another warning for medical prescription. You're going to get usually a couple warnings, and then they're going to give you a 1-day suspension, then a 3-day suspension. I think they do 5-day suspension. I could be wrong about that. Like I said, I've refined my process so I don't get suspended very often anymore. But yeah, 1-day suspension, 3-day suspension. I think it's 5-day suspension, week-long suspension, and then a 30-day suspension. And if you get further suspensions beyond that, they may give you the 30-day suspension like twice or something like that. If you are violating the same policy. But if you violate more than that, then you're just going to be too risky for them, and you're going to get the big boy, the indefinite selling suspension. So that one is a massive pain, very, very hard to deal with, and the thing to be avoided at all costs. So if your eBay account says indefinitely suspended, that's the big one that's really hard to fix. Anything else is definitely fixable. So sometimes you'll have other things like you're listing, you accidentally list the same item twice, and you're not allowed to have duplicate listings and things like that. They don't, at least right now, they don't seem to be too strict on that. You can get that several times, and it doesn't really seem to do all that much. But yeah, so that's kind of how suspensions work. Is just you'll get a couple warnings, and it's each suspension is its own thing. It's not total number of suspensions. It's each violations. I should say I'm saying the wrong word. There are a bunch of different things that eBay will consider policy violations, and they'll send you a bunch of different categories. They'll send you a warning for each category, usually 1 or 2 or 3 warnings, and then they'll start giving you restrictions and suspensions. And when you are restricted or suspended, then you basically are usually not allowed to revise items. You're not allowed to list. You're not allowed to do a bunch of different things. But those are the main things. You can't list new stuff, and you can't revise stuff. And yeah, so that's, a pretty big pain. But with the way that we do it, it's not that hard because we usually do all of our listing kind of in one bulk shot, and then we're fine. So as long as you're not getting, repeated violations of the same policy, you should be fine. You can violate 10 different eBay policies by accident. Not usually that many. Usually you have 3 out of 1,000 items or whatever, 2 or 3 that are going to slip through. But, you could theoretically violate 10 different eBay policies and you're not going to even get suspended. You'll be fine. But if you violate, the same policy 5 times, that's the kind of thing that's going to screw your account and get it banned from eBay and indefinitely suspended forever. So yeah, just one more time, you usually get warnings for when you do policy violations. Then you're going to get a 1-day suspension, 3-day suspension, 5-day suspension, 7-day suspension, 30-day suspension, possibly another 30-day suspension after that if you're lucky, and then if any violations beyond that are just going to be indefinite suspension on your account. So yes, you don't want to play around. You want to get as few as you possibly can, but also, if your account's never had a suspension before, then it's not really that big of a deal if you get like 1 or 2 warnings for policy violations. Just don't get repeated warnings, because that's not what you're going to want to do. Also, this is why I recommend doing a bunch of 1,000 item accounts rather than 10,000 item accounts, because your account can essentially, put up with a certain number of policy violations, and say you list 1,000 items and you have 2 or 3 policy violations from that, right? That's going to be fine. You're not likely to wreck your account with that. But then imagine you're doing a 10,000 item account. You list 10,000 items, right? That's 10 times the items. So instead of 2 to 3 violations, you're going to expect to get 20 to 30 violations, which your account probably is not going to be able to withstand. So that's why I say you should do a bunch of 1,000 item accounts rather than like one 10,000 item account. Yeah, so that's pretty good overview of suspensions, I think. If you get a suspension that you feel is incorrect or not deserved, or restriction that is not correct or not deserved, then you can just call up eBay and get it removed. So, for example, I had one account, my oldest account actually. This is before I was using Blue Care tracking, and this is also before dropshipping was against terms of service, so I wouldn't probably call and argue this now. But I was dropshipping. Dropshipping was perfectly fine and allowed, and not against their new dropshipping policy. And so I kept getting dinged for a policy violation of item location misrepresentation. So basically, like I was lying to buyers about where I was shipping from. And my location was set to multiple locations. Uh, and they were saying, oh, you're not shipping from multiple locations. But I clearly was. So I kept getting these violations, and it would be like, oh, I got a bunch of them. I think I got a 7-day, I think I even got a 30-day restriction. So I called them up and I said, hey, I am, it keeps dinging me and keeps getting these violations for item location policy, but I am, I'm following it. Your item location policy here, I can actually pull it up so that you can see. Item location policy, eBay. There we go. Item location policy, I would say, look, I've read your full item location policy, and it says sellers must provide the information about where their items are located, including the city, state, and country. Must be accurate and not misleading. All items located in the United States must include a zip code unless the item ships using freight or will ship from multiple locations. I'm shipping from multiple locations, and I put that in my listing. It says multiple locations, so can you go ahead and get this restriction removed for me, because I'm following this policy, and I have a supplier that is it ships from multiple locations. I didn't specifically tell them that supplier was Amazon, but I told them, I have suppliers and we have multiple warehouses throughout the United States, and I'm shipping from multiple locations, so I'm using the correct thing, and I've read your full item location policy. I'm not violating it, so can you have that? Can we get that restriction removed so that I can keep listing? And they were just like, oh yeah, well let me take a look here. You have to transfer a couple times, but then they were always able to remove it whenever I got that restriction, particularly on that account, because I knew their policies better than they did, and I proved to them that it was fine and I wasn't violating anything. So if you've got a fighting chance to get rid of a restriction or a suspension or something like that, then go ahead and call about it. But also, because of the way we're doing it, where we kind of list everything and it doesn't really hurt anything, if it's just a short suspension, if it's 1 day, 3 days, 5 days, might not even be worth it. If it's a 30-day, yeah, maybe it would make sense. But if it's a 1 day, 5 day, something like that, it's not really going to affect our sales at all, and as long as all your items are already up, it's not really going to affect you very much, so you might just want to leave it alone. Even if they undo the effects of a suspension, it doesn't undo the bad mark against your account from getting that suspension, if that makes sense. So if I kept getting I kept getting the item location policy suspension, but even though they were undoing it, I kept getting more severe and more severe suspensions, not because of anything that was my fault. They kept reversing it for me, but the bad mark was still there, so these suspensions were increasing in severity for that particular violation, if that makes any sense.
Anyway, guys, that's it for this video. If you're new to dropshipping and you're trying to figure out how to get started, I've got a full free set of training videos down there, link in the description. It goes over everything you need to know about how to get started making money online. And the average person following my method makes around $500 to $800 profit per month after expenses for each 1,000-item eBay store that they have set up and running. They're really not that hard to get started. If you've got any questions about anything dropshipping related, feel free to hit me up on Facebook. I'll put a link down there, as well as a link to a group that I started with hundreds of other dropshippers that you can join. I post new content on this channel every couple days, so go ahead and subscribe and click the notifications, and I'll see you back here with another video in a couple days.